Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. In this session, we'll learn why best-in-breed solutions make your teams more productive and how you can derive value from enriching your experimentation strategy, I should say, with product and analytics. I'm Yosha, and I lead technology partnerships here at Mixpanel.
And I'm Cassie, a product manager at Mixpanel.
Fantastic. Cassie, to get started, can you tell us what Mixpanel is actually all about and what you're currently working on?
Absolutely. So Mixpanel is a product analytics tool created for product teams, by product teams, a product team. We aim to make it really easy to explore your data and understand what your users are doing inside your product so that you can iterate and deliver value and measure the success of your launches. Right now, I'm thinking about how we can better provide experimentation analytics. I'm trying to increase the number of questions that people can ask and then get answered with Mixpanel reports. But enough about Mixpanel. This isn't a sales call, Josh. Let's talk about, let's pivot and talk about a decision that probably many of our audience members have had to make in the past. And that's this discussion about whether you should buy an analytics or A/B testing or experimentation tool, or you should build it in-house. I know that you're a co-founder of a successful SaaS startup, and so you've actually thought about this before. So could you share your experience?
Sure. Buy versus build. I think building is fun, right? It's fun for engineering teams to build some stuff, maybe as a side product or project. What you need to ask yourself is time to value. Will it take you much longer to build something that you could just buy? And what does that mean to your colleagues, to your teams that are dependent on this solution while they're waiting? And then it's the focus. While you're building an analytics tool or an experimentation tool or something else, what could you be doing instead? Shouldn't you be focusing on your core product to differentiate from your competition and help your company grow and be more successful?
Yeah. All right. So I buy into this idea that if it's not your core competency, you probably should outsource it to someone, to a company where their core competency is to provide you with a tool that has all the things you need. But there's a lot of options out there in the marketplace. So when you're evaluating tools, what's a mistake you've seen people make, in their judgment calls about deciding which one to buy, etc.?
Yeah, good question. I think there's always this temptation of just trying to buy one tool that does it all, that solves for several use cases that you have, maybe even across different departments. It's just one budget, just one procurement, and it seems nicely integrated. And that's probably really good product marketing, but it's not necessarily the truth. And what we've seen is that these broader all-in-one solutions, they may do everything superficially or well, but they can't be expert at one thing. And then they're competing with other companies that are just focused on the one thing that they are best in the world. So oftentimes, by just getting two solutions that are focused and go really deep, you will have a better experience and you will make your teams more productive and you will make your teams happier as well. And hopefully they'll retain better as well. So I think that's a temptation, but a common mistake that I've seen and that we've heard of. Enough about me. I think everyone here cares more about, Cassie, about your expertise as a product manager than my past experience with build or buy. So let's get back to you. Let's focus on you here. What makes you interested in experimentation right now? You said that's one of the areas you're working on.
Yeah, so Mixpanel's target audience is product teams, and one thing that a lot of successful product teams are doing right now is going for product-led growth. Essentially, this belief that if your product is amazing and people love using it, it'll essentially sell itself. In order to make an amazing product, you generally have to try more than one thing, and that's essentially experimentation. but you can't just, deploy two different variants and, shallowly say, looks like this one won, and, expect to be the next unicorn. It's deeper than that. You really need to pair your experimentation process with analytics, both qualitative and quantitative, so that you understand your users, you understand their problems, you understand like why your experiment succeeded or failed. You understand like what user cohorts it resonated with, and maybe which ones it just fell flat with. And so you can kind of probably pick up here that this is an interesting field to me because, well, A, it'll make me a better product manager. It's a tool that will help PMs be more effective at their jobs. But B, it just is, it's a winning strategy. It's one that we all need to use.
Right. So I know you've been speaking with quite a lot of customers recently that are thinking about these things as well, and speaking with their product teams. What are some challenges that you hear from them and that you experience yourself when it comes to experimenting and releasing new features and measuring what impact they actually have on the metrics that each company cares about?
Great question. All right, got 4 things that I've kind of trickled down. The first one is people in the very beginning, if you're new to experimentation, you often vastly underestimate the amount of time it takes to set up a good experimentation program and process. It's a little bit more complicated than you might think at first. So huge respect to teams that have figured it out and are deploying experiments on a regular cadence and learning from them. Secondly, it's important that you can demonstrate the impact of your work, the impact of the variant that wins, the impact of your team's efforts. In some teams, they don't have access to a tool like Mixpanel where you can just easily like answer questions with a few clicks. They have to go write some SQL, which is really arduous, or they need to go and email the data scientist and then wait for a reply back. And that like level of friction leads to just asking fewer questions because it's so much more work. And when you ask fewer questions, you understand less about your users. So you are less likely to kind of just have that successful experiment happen in the first place. All right, so demonstrating impact, it's harder than you think. Targeting betas. So, sometimes it's pretty common in product to not want to release a new thing to everyone at once. That's pretty risky, right? So you want to roll it out to a small segment of your population and you want to get feedback from them. And if you roll it out just to a randomized segment, you're kind of mixing your new users with your power users, with your dormant users. Like not all of them really know what's going on. So one thing I've learned is it's really advantageous to often roll out your experiment or your new feature to power users because they care the most. They're going to be most invested in being able of wanting to talk to you about what they hate or what they love. And they also have the context. They know the point of your tool. That's why they're using it. So the feedback that they give you tends to be spot on and you're not really like wasting your time working with a side persona. And then the last one is also related to risk. It's analyzing the downstream effects of your experiment on your core KPIs. It's fairly common when you're rolling something out to think about success metrics, to maybe have some guardrail metrics, but no matter how thorough you are, there's always these unknown unknowns. And so imagine how nice it can be to have a tool where you can essentially see, okay, I like launched this experiment, I have my treatment, I have my control, and oh wow, I didn't think of that, but it looks like this experiment actually completely tanked my user engagement for females, but not males, right?
Let's talk about that one. I find that one interesting, maybe because we care about metrics here. So, why is it something that you can't just solve with one of the tools? Like, why do you need to combine both the experimentation side, feature flagging side, and the product analytics to solve for this particular challenge?
Got it. So the feature flagging and experimentation tool, it helps you build an experiment, targeted audience, and deploy it. But a product analytics tool like Mixpanel allows you to deeply dive into the data and explore it, right? A lot of times when we're talking about data, we're actually talking about static dashboards, right? Something where you said, I want to look at this metric over time. And that's great for monitoring, but it's not great for exploring. And so kind of one of the big value propositions of Mixpanel or a product analytics tool is you can look at the metric, you can say, hey, it's going up, it's going down. I wonder why. And you can start to segment it, like break it down. You can break it down by persona. So for example, are new users behaving differently than power users? Or you can break it down by demographics, like are males behaving differently than females? Is mobile different than web? Right? And you can ask these questions. You can actually dive into the data. You don't have to go and send an email to someone and say, write a SQL query and tell me if you can find this. It takes like somewhere between like 30 seconds and a minute, and you just know. And that like rhythm, that excitement, that ability to just ask, at 5 whys, it gets you to value much faster, and it builds up excitement in your team because all of a sudden you have insight.
Yeah, and that helps you. And that's something that the experimentation tools typically can't solve for by themselves, because they may not have all the data on what else people did in the product. Is that right?
That is true. So I was going more for most of the experimentation tools. They focus on dashboards, not necessarily data discovery or exploration. Mm-hmm. But it's also true, Yosha, that they don't necessarily have all the data sources. They might not have all the user data tracked, et cetera. Right? It's just a siloed source of information.
Got it. Okay. So I might be wrong here, but I would assume that with every experiment that succeeds, there's probably also at least one experiment. I don't know if it's at least one, but there are some experiments that fail, right? And like, what do you do with those? Like, can you learn anything from the experiments that failed if you start asking those 5 layers of why?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question, because it is so it can be a real morale breaker on a team when you have a hypothesis, you spend the time building this test where you're just like, it's going to solve this problem, you deploy it, and then you get the results back and you find out that it's not making the impact that you expected. And going back to my earlier point where I said people underestimate the time it takes to put together good experiments, like that only makes the pain of failure even worse. And I guess that's why it's so important to be able to have the ability to dive into your data and explore your numbers and like your metrics and the patterns that you start to see. Because if you can't do that exploration, then a failure is a failure. But if you can, then a failure is a learning opportunity. Mm-hmm. And if you can take that failure and you can say, sure, it failed, but that's because we didn't know, this thing or that thing, or we didn't realize that like this group of users like loved it, right? But there was this other group of users hated it, and now we can go and talk to them and figure out why.
Got it. Okay. I know we're running almost up on time here, but one last question, maybe. You shared a lot what powers companies have when they analyze the impact of experiments on product usage, right? And try to understand why an experiment was successful or not. Are there any other benefits that companies get when they combine these two technologies?
Yeah. So outside of data exploration and really understanding like why users are behaving the way they are, what type of user behavior, how they differ across profiles. There's 2 other things that can be helpful. The first one is it can be helpful to target your experiments based on user behaviors. So for example, earlier I said it's nice to target betas towards power users because they're the ones that understand your product already and are motivated to give you actionable feedback.
Right.
Yeah. The other one is it can be really interesting to also target users based on their behaviors for personalization. So for example, you probably want to treat your new users a little bit differently than your power users. And you might take your like dormant users who have been onboarded before, but aren't really like getting the product, a third way. So you can personalize each of their experiences by joining your like cohort analysis and Mixpanel with your targeting and split so that these different user groups can experience different treatments and kind of get white glove service.
Yeah, that's awesome, right? So for example, if we see there are a couple of users that are always putting stuff in the shopping basket, but they're never actually purchasing anything. We might just take those users, isolate them, and then see if the revised checkout funnel with additional payment options solves for this, right?
Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like you already have a hypothesis about why they're not checking out, and you want to test and see if it's going to work. So yes, you could do that. And if the experiment succeeds, then it looks like your hypothesis that different payment methods are needed is right. But if it fails, maybe there's something else that's going on. And you could ask why. Like maybe they're actually all on mobile, and your checkout flow just, you're going to discover that the checkout flow looks terrible on mobile compared to web.
Yeah. Super interesting. I think we're at time. Obviously, we could speak for another 15 minutes, if not even longer, about this. But thank you, Cassie, for joining us today and for sharing what you're learning from all the customers that you're interviewing and your own experiences as a product manager.
It was great to be here, Josh. Thanks.
Likewise.